What's up, y'all? Focus Daily. Hit that like button, subscribe, support the channel. Today we're going to speak about the industrial cost, the cost of being caught up in bonds, industrial bonds, the cost of being registered into the corporate structure of this company known as America. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, us African Americans still had flourishing communities. We still had successful economic communities, which led to things like Black Wall Street, Williamton massacres. But ultimately, these bonds led to the loss of the land which God had given for us and our forefathers as a birthright. We lost this land due to the registrations and bonds that we binded ourselves within. All right, let's get into this reading today. This is going to be a short show. If you're new to the show, just hang in there. What we're speaking about is how God's children, the Afro-Americans, fell from grace, how we lost our status as the light of the world. We lost it by registration, ideological subversion, and assimilation into foreign cultures, foreign ideologies, and worshiping foreign gods. Let's go. Gonna start off with a little reading. Then I got a nice little movie for us.
Monzo.com makes Gantz great again. Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to say again because they never were. And
yeah, this YouTube is a process, but we shall get it down. All right, let's get into this reading. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 67. In the morning thou shalt say, would God it were evening. And at evening thou shalt say, would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, for the sight of thine eyes which thine shall see. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no one shall buy you. So a quick translation is, rather than living in a peaceful kingdom which God had granted us as our birthright, we found ourselves in an oppressive situation, in economic depression, economic discrimination. We found ourselves losing everything and going from the kingdom of heaven into a nightmare, where we became bondmen and bondwomen, and we sold ourselves unto our enemies. Yeah, I know it's a little complicated, but that's why I take this show one step at a time to try to break down these complicated verses and make them understandable for the average human being. All right, let's get into this short film. Just hang in there. We almost finished. The Great Migration of the 1910s, 1920s.
In the 1910s and 20s, a large number of African Americans moved from the South to other parts of the country. Why did they move? What kind of impact did this have on the nation? In 1900, most African Americans in the United States lived in southern states. In fact, 90% of the African American population still lived in the South.
Yes, we were in the South, but it wasn't due to slavery or the slavery that they teach us about in the educational system. It was because we already had claim to this land. When these pilgrims and foreigners arrived, we were already here. We already had flourishing communities. We already had a successful economy. Pretty much everything that we know as America already existed once these pilgrims began to arrive in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So that's what he's speaking of, the flourishing southern kingdom that was here when they arrived.
However, many began to move into northern and midwestern states.
And the question you ask is, why did they move voluntarily? Or was it a forced migration? Was it a trail of tears?
Such as Michigan, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and New York. The reasons they were moving varied from family to family. In some cases, they were hoping to find jobs in steel mills, automobile factories, meat packing plants, or working for the railroad. Some were searching for better schools and education opportunities. Others were hoping to escape the racism and violence that African Americans were experiencing in the South.
Facts. That's the facts of the situation. A Holocaust took place. As the foreigners began to discover small sovereign communities within these southern states, they immediately killed everybody who existed in the communities, especially the older generation. And they took the children and created orphanages and asylums of things of that nature in order to re-educate them to the current system that we have today of thinking that we are from Africa, which is a myth. We are from right here in these American states.
Most who left the South were heading for larger northern cities: Chicago, New York City, Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and
cities where they were allowed to participate in the so-called benefits of the corporate structure that was beginning to take over, to democratic strongholds, I should say.
in Cleveland all experienced significant surges in population. For example, in 1910, the African American population of Detroit was approximately 6,000. By 1930, this number had increased to 120,000. Nationwide, only an estimated 740.
So if you ever wondered how the African American demographics became what they were, with most of us huddled in to these democratic strongholds, it was due to this great migration. The people wasn't seeking jobs, they were seeking safety from the Holocaust that was taking place in their home, on their ground.
3,000 African Americans lived outside of the South in 1900. As the 20th century progressed, this number eventually rose to more than 10 million living in other regions of the country. The Great Migration was one of the largest and fastest movements ever by a group of people who were moving from one part of a nation to another. This is especially true when considering that the movement.
So this great kingdom that God had gave us became a nightmare, which forced us to run and move. So the true essence of the Great Migration was escaping a Nazi Holocaust, escaping the massacres that were taking place in the 20s. Google the Red Summer and you'll get a good idea of how much murder and killing was taking place, how truly great the Black Holocaust was.
Movement was not caused by some kind of immediate threat or danger. This migration had many different ramifications for the nation. As black populations rose, many northern cities became increasingly more integrated.
See, of course, this narrator is speaking in code. In no way are they going to truly tell who we are and who this land truly belongs to. So you have to look past the code and you have to ask yourself, why all of a sudden did black people just begin to disperse and move to these democratic strongholds? And I guarantee you it wasn't for a job. They already teach us that we were fresh out of slavery and discriminated against. And as Black Wall Street illustrated is, we were more successful when we stayed amongst each other and created our own economies. So why would we leave success and go to a democratic situation where we were living in projects? We were on welfare programs. That don't make sense at all. We may have lost our sight of God, but we wasn't crazy.
African Americans were working alongside recent European immigrants as well as other white residents. These cities also became important centers for African American culture. Newspapers, churches, businesses, and political organizations were all established by African Americans as part of a movement to redefine black culture. Harlem became the center of much of this activity. Musicians, artists, and writers flocked to the area, bringing about the era that would have...
Now, although we were running from destruction and this great Holocaust, we still were the great people that we are and always have been. And we still made the best of the situations we found ourselves in, exactly as the Bible speaks of. God wanted us to make the best of the situation we were in, but he also wanted us to understand why we were put in this position. So when the second Adam arrived, we'll never find ourselves in these positions again. We'll never bite that apple again.
Eventually become known as the Harlem Renaissance. There were also some negative impacts of the Great Migration. Many African Americans who moved north did experience racism in their...
I just be freestyling, you know. I don't have no script. I don't have no notes. I'm just speaking it straight from within.
...their new cities. In some neighborhoods, white residents moved away, having no desire to live with black neighbors. This resulted in some places, such as Harlem, having an almost exclusively black population. Obviously, another significant impact of the Great Migration was the changing demographics of the South. Every southern state experienced a loss in African American population, especially in the rural regions.
So we lost our ground. We lost our agricultural dominance. Our agricultural dominance. At one point, we controlled all the farmland, all the rich soils. But as a cost of the industrial bond we found ourselves in, we lost. Let me look at this real quick. Industrial costs. Full industrial costs mean the sum of direct costs plus a reasonable share of the overhead. So the direct cost of registering ourselves and bonding ourselves is we gave up our status in exchange for a black classification, which means nothing in law. So we gave up our status as God's children to become nothing. When I say we, I don't mean us individually. I mean our parents, our grandparents, all the people who signed those birth certificates and registered us into this demonic democratic system. Ain't no such thing as a democracy in a republic. One nation under God, individual, to the republic we stand. You know, I haven't said the pledge in so long, but this is a republic. All right, let's get back to the video. Like I say, I'm just freestyling. But if you pay attention, you will learn.
African Americans made up more than 50% of the populations in both Mississippi and South Carolina. Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Georgia had populations that were more
there go that word again. Biblically, it is known as the Southern Kingdom, the Kingdom of Judah. You got to learn how to take this information that I'm giving you and apply it to the Bible, in order to start to truly understand the truth of the world we live in today.
40% black. Within just a few decades, these numbers would be reduced to less than 30% in nearly every one of those states.
All right, that's it for today. Another short, sweet episode of the Focus Daily Show. Before y'all go, hit that like button, subscribe, support the channel, hashtag Focus Daily TV. We out.